The first crack of bone against bark echoed through the silent forest, a sound so utterly wrong it froze the blood in my veins. I didn't see what made it, not at first, but I heard the frantic rustling, the desperate scramble of something large and powerful, followed by a guttural snarl that was more animalistic than anything I'd ever encountered. I clutched the railing of the fire tower, my knuckles white, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Below me, the dense canopy of pines swayed gently in a phantom breeze, hiding whatever unspeakable horror had just unfolded. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a mountain lion. This was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist. My name is George, and for the past 30 years, this fire tower has been my sanctuary, my escape from a world I never quite fit into. 51 years old, with more gray in my beard than brown, I've seen my share of strange things in these woods, lightning strikes that split ancient trees, the silent majesty of an owl's flight, the eerie glow of foxfire on damp nights. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the abomination that now stalks these ancient forests. It was a Tuesday, late autumn. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. I remember thinking it was a perfect day for a long watch. The sky was a clear, unblemished blue, and the distant peaks shimmered with the first dusting of snow. I had just brewed a fresh pot of coffee and was settling into my routine, scanning the horizon, when the first sound reached me. It wasn't the distant rumble of thunder or the whine of a chainsaw. It was a guttural, wet-tearing sound, followed by a choked, desperate cry that was abruptly cut short. I grabbed my binoculars, my hands trembling. My usual calm, my practiced eye for identifying forest sounds, was gone, replaced by a primal dread. I swept the binoculars across the tree line, searching, my breath held tight in my chest. The sun, already low in the afternoon sky, cast long, distorted shadows, making every twisted branch seem like a lurking menace. Then I saw it. A flash of dark fur, impossibly fast, moving through the undergrowth. It was too large to be a wolf, too agile to be a bear. And the way it moved, not on all fours, not quite. It was bipedal, a hulking, muscular silhouette that darted between the trees with terrifying speed. My blood ran cold. I watched, mesmerized by a horror I couldn't comprehend. The creature stopped in a small clearing, partially obscured by a thicket of oak. It was enormous, easily over 7 feet tall, its body a grotesque parody of human and beast. Its fur was matted, a dark, muddy brown, almost black in the failing light. Its limbs were thick with muscle, ending in wickedly sharp claws that glinted even in the dimming sun. The head was bestial, with a long snout, razor-sharp teeth exposed in a silent snarl, and eyes, glowing red, like embers in a forgotten fire. It stood there, sniffing the air, its head twitching, a low, guttural growl rumbling in its chest. It was the most terrifying, utterly repulsive thing I had ever witnessed. This was no Hollywood monster, this was a nightmare given flesh, breathing and hunting in the woods I called home. I barely dared to breathe, afraid that any sound, even the beat of my own heart, would draw its attention. It moved again, with a disturbing grace for something so monstrous, disappearing back into the deeper shadows of the woods. I stayed glued to the binoculars, my muscles rigid, until the last vestige of light faded from the sky and the forest became a terrifying, echoing void. That night was a blur of fear and sleepless vigilance. I sat by the dim glow of my lantern, shotgun clutched in my lap, listening to every rustle, every snap of a twig. The silence of the forest, once comforting, was now suffocating, pregnant with unseen threats. Days turned into weeks, and my peaceful solitude was shattered. I began to see signs, trees gouged by impossibly long claws, large paw prints, though they looked more like distorted human hands, in the muddy creek beds, and the unsettling silence of the usual forest creatures. The deer, the rabbits, even the birds seemed to have vanished, leaving the woods eerily empty. One particularly foggy morning, the mist hung low and thick, muffling all sound. I was on my usual patrol route, checking for fires, my senses heightened by a constant undercurrent of fear. That's when I found it. A deer, or what was left of it. It had been torn apart, not cleanly, but violently, savagely. The ground around it was soaked with dark, glistening blood, and the air was thick with the metallic stench. And in the midst of the carnage, a single, clear print, the unmistakable, horrifying imprint of a clawed, partially human foot. I stood there, frozen, the fog swirling around me like a shroud. The sheer brutality of it made me sick to my stomach. This was not the work of a natural predator. This was pure, unadulterated savagery. This was the work of the scary werewolf. My fear turned into a cold, hard determination. I couldn't abandon my post. This tower was my life, and these woods, however terrifying they had become, were my home. But I also knew I couldn't simply ignore what was happening. I began to carry my rifle everywhere, always loaded, always ready. My peaceful days of watching the sunrise over the peaks were replaced by anxious scanning, constantly searching for that hulking, dark shape. Then came the howls. Not the mournful cry of a wolf, but something deeper, more guttural, a sound that vibrated through the very bones of the forest, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and hunger. It started one night, a full moon hanging like a malevolent eye in the clear sky. The first howl was distant, coming from the north. Then another, closer, from the west. And then a third, from the south. They weren't communicating, they were challenging. My blood ran cold. I whispered to myself, the word a desperate plea for denial. But the truth was undeniable. There was more than one. From the vantage point of the tower, I saw it unfold like a nightmare ballet. Two massive, dark shapes emerged from the tree line, moving with a predatory grace that was both horrifying and mesmerizing. One was the original, immense creature I had seen before, its fur matted in dark. The other was slightly smaller, but no less terrifying, its fur a lighter, almost ash-gray color, its glowing red eyes burning with an intense fury. They circled each other, a silent, deadly dance under the unforgiving moonlight. The air thrummed with a palpable tension, a predatory energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. No growls, no snarls, just pure, concentrated menace. It was clear these scary werewolves weren't allies, they were rivals. Suddenly, with an earth-shattering roar that finally broke the silence, the darker werewolf lunged. The gray one met it with equal ferocity. The fight was a blur of teeth and claws, a whirlwind of snapping jaws and tearing fur. They moved with incredible speed and power, smashing into trees, sending splinters flying. The sounds of their struggle echoed through the valley, the wet thud of impacts, the ripping of flesh, the guttural screams of rage that were almost human in their anguish. I watched, transfixed, my hands gripping the railing so tightly I thought it would splinter. These weren't animals fighting for territory, these were monsters driven by a primal, insatiable bloodlust, a hatred so profound it transcended anything I could comprehend. The dark werewolf was relentless, its sheer brute force overwhelming. It tore into the gray one, sinking its fangs into its shoulder, shaking it like a rag doll. The gray one retaliated, raking its claws across the dark one's flank, leaving deep, gaping wounds. Blood, dark and viscous, splattered onto the forest floor, glistening ominously in the moonlight. This was a war, a brutal, horrifying conflict between two creatures of pure evil, and I was the sole, terrified witness. The fight seemed to last an eternity, a gruesome spectacle of raw power and unbridled savagery. Finally, with a deafening roar of triumph, the darker, larger scary werewolf delivered a devastating blow to the gray one's neck. There was a sickening crack, and the gray werewolf collapsed, its body twitching for a moment before falling still. The victor stood over its fallen rival, chest heaving, a low, triumphant growl rumbling in its throat. It was covered in blood, its own and that of its adversary, a truly demonic sight under the full moon. It then did something that solidified my fear into absolute terror, it began to feed. Not like an animal, but with a deliberate, horrifying relish, tearing into the carcass of the defeated scary werewolf. I watched, horrified, as the creature consumed its kill, a grotesque feast of flesh and bone. The sounds of its feeding, the wet tearing, the crunching, echoed in the night, a symphony of pure horror. I felt my stomach churn, bile rising in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed, trapped in my high vantage point, forced to witness this unspeakable act. When it was finished, the dark scary werewolf looked up, its blood-red eyes scanning the surrounding forest. And for a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, its gaze seemed to lock directly onto the fire tower. Onto me. My blood ran cold. It couldn't see me, not through the glass, not from this distance, not in the dark. Could it? A primal instinct screamed at me to hide, to disappear. But I couldn't move. I was a deer in headlights, utterly exposed. It stood there for a long moment, its head tilted slightly, as if listening, or perhaps, thinking. Then, with a final, chilling snarl, it turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest, leaving behind a silence even more profound and terrifying than before. I remained in the tower until dawn, shivering despite the warmth of my clothes. The image of those glowing red eyes burned into my retina. The forest, once a place of refuge, had become a hunting ground for unseen, monstrous predators. And I, George, was no longer just a fire watchman. I was a spectator in a deadly game, an unwilling witness to a horror that defies explanation. I know it's still out there. I hear the distant howls sometimes, the unsettling silence that precedes an attack. I've seen more signs of its presence, and sometimes, in the dead of night, I feel its presence, a cold dread that chills me to the bone. I'm trapped here, bound by my duty, or perhaps, by a morbid fascination with the very thing that terrifies me most. The woods have eyes now, and those eyes are red and hungry. Every night, I check the locks, double-check my rifle, and peer out into the impenetrable darkness, waiting, always waiting. I know my time will come. It's only a matter of time before it finds its way up here, or before I make a fatal mistake. The forest has claimed many, and I have a feeling it's about to claim one more.